I found out she'd broken her own rule because of a smudge. I was wiping down the kitchen the morning before the landlord came to look at the place. Lease was up. He wanted to walk through. The usual. And there's this whiteboard on the side of our fridge, has been there 2 years, where Ren keeps the house rules. I was running the rag along the edge of it, not even reading it. The way you stop reading a thing you pass 40 times a day, and the rag caught on Rule 7, dragged a little of the marker. And I stopped because the handwriting on Rule 7 was wrong. It wasn't the handwriting that had been there for 2 years. Rule 7 used to say no catching feelings. 3 years of that joke. And now, in Ren's small, careful letters, in fresher ink that smudged because it hadn't had time to set the way old marker does, it said something else. It said, Rule 7, too late. I stood there in the kitchen with a wet rag in my hand, and I want to tell you my whole life rearranged itself in about 4 seconds. But the truth is slower and dumber than that. The truth is I stood there for a long time not understanding what I was looking at. The way you stare at a word until it stops being a word. Then I understood it fine. And then I had to figure out how long it had been there, which turned out to be the part that broke me a little. Because the answer was weeks. She'd written it weeks ago. And I walk past that board 40 times a day, and I hadn't seen it, because I stopped reading Rule 7 a long time ago on purpose. Because reading it hurt. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because this only lands if you understand the board, and the rule, and why a grown man would arrange his whole life around not looking at a whiteboard. My name's Theo. I'm 31, I fix bicycles for a living, I run the repair counter at a shop. I'm the guy who trues your wheel and tells you your chain's been stretched for 1,000 miles and you've been pretending not to hear it. I'm good with things that are out of true. I can spin a wheel and watch it wobble and know exactly which spoke to turn and how far. People are the other thing. People I'm no good at, which you'll see, because the whole story is about a thing that was out of true for 3 years right in front of me, and I kept not turning the spoke. Ren moved in 3 years ago off a roommate listing. I'd had the apartment a while, needed to split it, put up a post that was honestly kind of grumpy, quiet person wanted. I work early, I don't want a party house. Please be normal. Most of the people who answered were not normal. Then Ren showed up. First thing she did was walk the whole apartment with a little notebook, opening cabinets, checking the water pressure, and I figured, great, here's a fussy one, this won't last. Then she sat down at my kitchen table and said, okay, I like it. But I live by systems. I'm going to warn you now. I'm a person who needs the dishes done a certain way and the rules written down. Because I grew up in a house where nothing was ever written down and everybody just screamed about it later. And I'm not doing that again. If that's going to drive you insane, tell me now and I'll go. And I don't know what it was. The way she said it, maybe. Honest. Flat. No apology. A person telling you exactly who she is at the door so nobody gets surprised later. I said the dishes thing didn't bother me. She moved in that weekend. The whiteboard went up the first day. She bought it, mounted it on the fridge, and wrote the house rules in that small, careful hand. Rule 1. Dishes get done the night of, not the morning after. Rule 2. Label your food or it's communal, no complaints. Rule 3. Rent on the 1st. She'd Venmo her half by the 28th, so we were never scrambling. Practical stuff. 6 rules. All of them the rules of a person who'd decided that a peaceful home was something you build on purpose, with structure, because she'd never had one that came free. I need you to understand that about her before anything else, because it's the key to the whole thing. Ren didn't make rules because she was uptight. She made rules because she'd been somewhere with no rules and watched it become a war. And she'd decided she would rather have a home that was a little over-organized than ever live in that again. The board wasn't her being controlling. The board was her saying, this place is safe, here's how we keep it safe, I need this. Rule 7 came later, about 2 months in. We'd gotten close fast, the way you do with the right roommate, that thing where the apartment stops being 2 people splitting rent and starts being a place you're both glad to come home to. We cooked. We had a show. She'd come home wrung out from work. She does intake at a veterinary clinic, which sounds cute and is actually her spending all day with people on the worst day of their pet's life, and she'd carry it home in her shoulders. And I learned to read it, and have the kettle on, and not make her talk if she didn't want to. She learned that I went quiet and weird when the shop was slow and money was tight, and she'd just sort of be around more those weeks, not making a thing of it. We fit. It happened without either of us deciding it. And one night, about 2 months in, we were on the couch and the show had ended and neither of us had moved to put on the next one or go to bed. And there was a thing in the air. The kind of thing you can feel in your teeth. The kind of quiet that's about to become something. And I think we both got scared at the exact same second, because we both had the same thought, which was, this is the best living situation I've ever had, and the fastest way in the world to blow it up is this. Right here. This feeling. Ren stood up, went to the fridge, uncapped the marker, and she added a 7th rule to the board, saying it out loud as she wrote it, like she was making a joke, except neither of us was laughing. Rule 7, she said. No catching feelings. And I said, seconded, like an idiot, like it was funny, and we both went to bed, and that was that. The rule was set. We had named the thing and walled it off and turned it into a joke. And a joke is a wonderful place to bury something you're afraid of, because you can take it out and look at it any time you want and never once have to admit it's real. That joke ran for 3 years. It became the whole language of us. Anytime we got too close to the line, one of us would point at the board. She'd fall asleep against my shoulder during the show and wake up and say Rule 7 and move to the other cushion. I'd catch myself looking at her too long across the kitchen and she'd catch me catching myself and just point at the fridge without even looking up, and I'd laugh and go back to my coffee. We weaponized it. It was how we kept the door shut. Rule 7 said in a flat voice, pointed at, invoked like scripture, was the thing that let 2 people who were absolutely falling for each other live 4 feet apart for 3 years and never do anything about it. I can give you the close calls, because there were 100 of them and I remember every one. There was the night the power went out, and we sat on the kitchen floor with a candle and talked until 3 in the morning about our families. The real stuff. The stuff you only say in the dark. And at one point she put her head on my shoulder and we both froze. And after about a minute, she said Rule 7 into my sleeve, barely a whisper, and didn't move. And neither did I. And we sat there breaking the rule and invoking it at the same time until the power came back. There was the time I had the flu and she took 3 days off the way you'd take off for family, and on the worst night she sat on the edge of my bed with her hand on my forehead checking the fever, and when I said, hoarse and half delirious, "You're breaking Rule 7," she said, "You're contagious. This doesn't count," and I have thought about that sentence more than a grown man should. There was her birthday, where I found the exact obscure candy she'd mentioned once, months before, that they don't even sell here, that I'd ordered from 3 states away, and she opened it and got quiet and looked at me a beat too long, and then pointed, very slowly, at the fridge. And we both laughed because it was easier than the alternative. That was the whole pattern of us. Get right up to the edge of the true thing, feel it land in both of us at once, and then reach for the joke like a handrail. The board saved us from falling 100 times. I used to be grateful for it. Now I think it just meant we fell 100 times and pretended we hadn't. And here's the part I'm not proud of, the part where I tell you I was the fool. Because somebody in this story has to be, and it's me. I believed the rule. I believed it about her. I told myself Rule 7 was Ren's actual position, that she'd made the rule because she genuinely didn't want this, didn't feel it, had decided I was a great roommate and nothing more, and the rule was her kind way of keeping me from embarrassing us both. And so I took my own feelings, which by year 2 were not small, which were the kind of thing I thought about on the drive home, and I buried them under the joke, same as she had. And I kept them buried, because I'd decided that respecting Rule 7 meant respecting her, and that saying anything would be me being the guy who couldn't take a hint and turned a good home into a thing she had to escape. I stopped looking at the board. That's the detail that matters. Somewhere in year 2, reading Rule 7 every morning started to sting this dumb joke that had calcified into the actual wall of my life, and so I did the thing you do with a thing that hurts, which is I stopped seeing it. I'd wipe the board down for the landlord, I'd glance at the rent reminder, but Rule 7 had become furniture. I could have told you it was there. I couldn't have told you I'd actually read it in a year. That's why I missed it for weeks. Hold on to that, it matters later. So that was us. 3 years. The best home either of us had ever had. 2 people quietly in love and both convinced the other one wasn't. A whiteboard keeping the whole thing pinned shut. And it could have gone on like that forever, honestly. That's the tragedy of a comfortable thing. It can go on forever. Most of them do. Except the lease came up. Our lease renews every 2 years long lease. The landlord likes stability. We'd signed one when Ren moved in and now the second one was ending. And about a month before the deadline, the landlord emailed to say rent was going up. Not a lot, but some. And he needed to know by the 1st whether we were re-signing for another 2 years or moving on. And something about that email changed the air in the apartment. Because a lease isn't a joke. Rule 7 is a joke. But signing your name to 2 more years next to somebody that's a real thing. A thing with a pen and a date on it, and you can't point at the board and laugh it off. The email sat on the counter, printed out, for about a week, and neither of us talked about it, and the not talking about it got loud. Then one night Ren brought it up, and she brought it up wrong, or I heard it wrong. I still don't fully know which. We were in the kitchen and she said, not looking at me, we should talk about the lease. I said, sure. And she said, I've been thinking. Maybe we need some actual boundaries before we sign on for 2 more years. Like real ones. Because if we keep living the way we live, the dinners and the show and all of it, somebody's going to get hurt eventually. And I don't want that to be how this ends. Now here's what she was saying, which I did not understand until much later. She was saying she was scared, because she'd already fallen, and 2 more years of living like this without doing anything about it felt unbearable, and she didn't know how to say the real thing, so she said it sideways, the way scared people do. And here's what I heard. I heard, she's getting out. I heard a woman gently, kindly, building the off-ramp. I heard boundaries and somebody's going to get hurt, and I translated it instantly through 3 years of believing Rule 7 into, she can feel that I'm too attached, and she's letting me down easy, and she's going to move out, and this is her being decent about it. So I did the stupidest, most self-protective thing a person can do. I agreed with her. Fast, too. Fast. Yeah, I said. No, you're right. We should be smarter about it. Real boundaries. Good idea. And I watched something close in her face. I thought at the time it was relief, her being glad I'd taken the hint, and I know now it was the exact opposite. She'd worked herself up to crack the door open, and I'd helped her slam it. She'd said we need boundaries, hoping I'd say I don't want boundaries, I want the opposite of boundaries. And instead I'd said good idea, because I was so sure of the rule that I couldn't hear her breaking it. So we did boundaries. God help us, we did boundaries. The weeks after that were the worst weeks of the whole 3 years, and they were quiet, which is the worst kind of worst. We stopped having the show. We did our own dinners. She stopped falling asleep on the couch because she stopped being on the couch when I was. The apartment, which had been the warmest place I knew, went cool and careful. 2 polite people sharing a kitchen, saying excuse me, leaving the room when the other came in so as not to crowd. And the boxes started not a lot, just a few. A couple of empty boxes that appeared by her door, which I read as her packing, getting ready to go, and which I now think were her just having boxes because she didn't know what was happening either, and a person who lives by systems gets boxes when she's scared. I figured she was leaving. I started, in my head, getting ready to live alone again. I'd come home and the lease paper would have moved on the counter, and I'd think, this is it. She's deciding, and I never once, not one single time in those weeks, said the thing. Because the thing was against the rule. And I was the guy who respected the rule. There was one night in there I keep coming back to. I came home late, and she was already in the kitchen making tea, and we did the new dance, the careful one. I waited in the doorway so I wouldn't crowd her at the counter. She finished fast so I could have the space, and we said excuse me twice, and she took her tea to her room and shut the door soft. And I stood in that kitchen, in the home that used to be the best place I knew, and it was so quiet I could hear the clock, and I thought, we did this. We took the warmest thing either of us ever had and we boundaried it to death because we were both too scared to say one true sentence. And I almost knocked on her door. I stood in the hallway with my hand up, and then I looked at the board, out of habit, not really reading it, and the shape of Rule 7 in the corner of my eye reminded me of the rule, and I put my hand down and went to bed. If I'd read it that night instead of just glancing at it, this would be a much shorter story. But that's the whole point, isn't it? I'd trained myself not to read the one thing that would have told me everything. That's where I was the morning the landlord was coming. That's the morning I was wiping down the board so it looked nice for the walkthrough. Rag along the edge, not reading, the way you don't read furniture. And the rag caught Rule 7 and smudged the marker, and I really looked at the board for the first time in a year. Rule 7, too late. In her handwriting. In fresh ink. And I want to walk you through what actually went through my head, because it wasn't romance, not at first. First it was confusion, when did she change this? Then it was the marker itself, the fact that it smudged, which meant it was newer than the rest, which meant she hadn't done it last night in some heat-of-the-moment thing, she'd done it a while ago, days, weeks, and it had been sitting there. Then it was the math, and the math is what got me. Because I started counting backward and I realized she'd almost certainly changed it before the boundaries conversation. Before she said maybe we need boundaries. Before the cold weeks. She'd written too late on the board. And then she'd waited. And I hadn't looked. And when I didn't look, when nothing happened, when the man who walked past it 40 times a day said nothing, that's when she'd panicked and pivoted to maybe we need boundaries. Because she'd put her whole heart up on the fridge in 2 words and the guy hadn't even noticed. And what do you do with that? Except assume you've been a fool. And start protecting yourself. And get some boxes. I had done that to her. By not looking. By being so sure of a rule that I couldn't see her erasing it right in front of me. I was still standing there when she came out of her room. She had her work clothes on, she was heading out, and she saw me at the board. Saw which rule I was looking at. Saw the smudge where my rag had caught it, and she went completely still in the hallway. The kind of still where a person is calculating whether they can pretend something isn't happening. The landlord's coming at 10, she said, which was not what either of us was talking about. Ren, I put the rag down. How long has the board said this? She didn't answer. She looked at the floor. How long? I said. Does it matter? It matters more than anything has ever mattered. How long? And she said, in a voice I'd never heard from her, small and furious at herself, 5 weeks. I changed it 5 weeks ago. I stood right there, and I erased the stupid joke, and I wrote the true thing. And I told myself, if you noticed, if you said one word about it, I'd know. And you didn't. You walked past it every single day, and you didn't even her voice cracked, and after 2 weeks of you not seeing it, I figured that was my answer. That you really did just want a roommate, and the rule was the only thing keeping me from making this unbearable. So I thought, fine, I'll build the boundaries for real, I'll protect myself, I'll get ahead of it before I lose the apartment and you both. She wiped her eyes hard, angry at the tears. So that's how long. 5 weeks. Now you know. The landlord's coming at 10. And I started to laugh. It was the wrong response, and I couldn't help it. Not mean laughing. The laugh that comes out of you when you find out the thing you've been grieving was never lost, when the tragedy turns out to be a misunderstanding. When you realize 2 people spent 5 weeks breaking their own hearts over a whiteboard. Ren, I said. I stopped reading Rule 7 a year ago. She looked up. I stopped reading it on purpose. Because every morning it said no catching feelings, and I'd already caught them, all of them, 2 years ago. And reading the rule every day was like pressing on a bruise. So I stopped looking at the board. That's why I didn't see it. Not because I didn't care. Because I cared so much I couldn't stand to read the rule that said I wasn't allowed to. Her face did something complicated. And the boundaries thing, I said. When you said we needed boundaries before the lease. I heard you trying to get out. I heard you letting me down easy. I agreed with you so fast because I thought you could feel how far gone I was, and you were being kind about it, and I'd rather have helped you leave than make you say it to my face. I've spent 5 weeks thinking you were packing. Those boxes by your door have been ending me. The boxes are because I panic buy storage solutions when my life is falling apart, she said. I have a problem. I know you do. Rule 4 used to be about your label maker. Rule 4 was a reasonable rule. We stood there in the hallway, The two of us, with the landlord coming at 10 and 3 years and 5 weeks of being idiots between us, and I did the thing I should have done in year 2. I walked over to the board. I picked up the marker, and under Rule 7 too late, in my handwriting, which is terrible, which she has always made fun of, I wrote one more line. I wrote, Rule 8, me too, for about 2 years now. And Ren made a sound that was half a laugh and half the other thing, and she crossed the hallway, and she did not point at the board. For the first time in 3 years, she did not point at the board. And that's the end of the part of the story where we were fools. I'll tell you what we did about the lease, since that was supposedly the whole crisis. We signed it. Both names, 2 more years, and the landlord came at 10 and walked through and had no idea he was walking through the first morning of an entirely different apartment than the one we'd been living in. We didn't tell him. It wasn't his business. He checked the water pressure, same as Ren had 3 years before, and left, and we sat down at the kitchen table where she'd first told me she lived by systems, and we figured out, carefully, like 2 people who both know exactly how rare a good home is, how to do this without wrecking the thing that made it worth doing. We're taking it slow. I mean genuinely slow, not movie slow. We've both seen what it looks like when a good living situation turns into a war, she more than me, and we are not cavalier about it. Some days are easy. Some days one of us gets scared and goes quiet and the other one knows now to just ask instead of assuming. Because assuming is the thing that nearly cost us everything. I assumed the rule was real. She assumed my silence was an answer, and we were both wrong in the exact same shape. The board's still up. We kept it. Rules 1 through 6 are the same. Dishes still get done the night of. She still labels her food. But the bottom of it's different now. Rule 7 still says too late. Because she won't let me erase it, she says it's the truest thing she ever wrote. And Rule 8 is still my terrible handwriting. And we've added a few since, dumb ones. Ours, Rule 11, is no deciding what the other person means. Just ask them. Which is the only rule on that whole board that actually matters. The one that could have saved us 3 years if we'd had it sooner. So here's what I'd ask you, since you stuck with me this long. Is there a board in your life, not a real one, maybe, but a rule you set a long time ago to keep yourself safe, that's quietly become the wall keeping you from the thing you actually want? Because I had one, and I was so faithful to it, so sure that respecting it made me a good man, that I couldn't see the person right in front of me erasing it and writing the true thing and waiting for 5 weeks for me to look up. And is there somebody who might be doing that right now, leaving the true thing out in plain sight, in some small way, hoping you'll notice? A text they almost send, a look they hold a second too long, a joke that isn't really a joke. Because people are leaving us these little confessions all the time, written in fresh ink on the boards we've stopped reading. And the only reason we miss them is that at some point the rule started to hurt, and we decided it was easier not to look. Go look. Read the board again. The real one. The one in whatever form it takes in your life. Read the rule you stopped reading. Somebody may have changed it weeks ago and been waiting this whole time for you to catch the smudge. Tell me in the comments, what does your Rule 7 say? The old version, the one you set to protect yourself. And what would it say if you finally let yourself write the true thing underneath it? Ours says too late. Turns out that was never the bad news. Turns out too late to keep from falling is just another way of saying you already landed. And the floor was a home the whole time. And the only thing left to do was finally look up and see it. The landlord comes back in 2 years. The board will still be there. I have a feeling it'll have a lot more rules on it by then. Most of them ours,